Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's early Thursday morning, so hopefully people would have enough time to get their questions in, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Shorzor said they just acquired an Extron Crosspoint 450 HVA 2424. They have a question regarding cable lengths. They're considering using the Crosspoint for the next Pixel Party. That was that awesome meetup in the Faroe Islands of like a retro gaming expo meetup thing. And Shorzor was considering using it to monitor the different console setups, maybe even streaming them. To make this possible, they'd have to plug every screen and every console to the matrix, so routing is possible, but this will require really long cables as the setups are scattered around. So the question, other than noise, is there anything to have in mind with the cable lengths? Impedance of the cable, maybe? They could, of course, split the signal with a distribution amp at each setup and hook that up to the crosspoint, but then they lose the potential routing capabilities. So this is one of those things where I personally would try it and see what happens, do a test run. This is actually a really great use for the HD Retrovision extension cables. And I think Steve said he plugged 3 in together. So the main RCA to RCAs and then 2 extensions together, and before seeing any kind of degradation on the scope. Now, that's obviously, in a lab and stuff like that. But if you're really talking about the setups are going to be 20 feet away, then that should, I was about to say that should definitely work, but with analog video, you never really know, but that should work potentially. You could try to find 50-foot BNC cables. That would probably work as well. But this is something where I think you should just give it a try. Give it a try at home and, leave the cable just coiled up or something just to see. But what you might run into is some interference and slightly dimmer signal. And I think for the most part, you would be fine. If this was a permanent setup, if you wanted to wire something crazy into your house, I would probably suggest a few other things and individual stations, and the total cost would be about the same. But when you're talking about setting up for an event like that, having one matrix switch that controls everything right from a central point would probably be a good idea. But I don't think I would go over 50 feet. Now, anybody out there who's used to running long runs of analog video, please chime in and let me know. I've heard people go, a few 100 feet with and without distribution amps, and depending on what the setup is and what you're looking to do, it might be fine. But this is one of those things where, I don't know, I would just kind of take a step back and see what the easiest and most cost-effective thing would be. And if you're within 20 feet of each other, might be fine. And if not, I don't know, individual setups, and maybe look into some kind of wireless streaming. Maybe just borrowing a bunch of cheap laptops or something, and then hooking them up that way, and just doing wireless streaming. That might work too. But I don't want to go too down a rabbit hole on this because I'm not sure if you've already looked into other alternatives. So I'll just say, I think you should be fine within a reasonable distance, but just kind of look at the total overall use case and see what you think might be best. And of course, as always, hit me up for any other questions and we could discuss this further. Now, moving on over to Patreon, Reagan Kelly has an early model Sega Saturn with a flaky video output. Sometimes it'll spontaneously lose a color in the video output like blue or red. Usually jiggling the AV cable will fix this, but it happens pretty consistently. It's definitely the console since they've tried multiple displays and cables. They reflowed solder to the multi-out, but that has not fixed the issue. They're preparing to do a recap, but they also thought they should try replacing the multi-out video connector. To their surprise, they can't seem to find anywhere to buy the 10-pin Saturn-style mini-DIN connector. They figure they must be available somewhere since they see the Mr. Hardware folks putting them on their products, but they're not sure where to source one. Any ideas? So, first of all, excellent nerding. You've already gone through all of the exact same troubleshooting steps that most modders would have told you to go through anyway, so well done there. Replacing the AV port is exactly what I would do next. Recapping something like this is going to take a long time, and it's a good idea for preservation, just to make sure that a cap doesn't leak out and start hurting your motherboard when you don't even realize it's happening. But I don't think that it would affect this at all. Maybe if you just kind of lightly touched the caps around the video circuit. I can't even remember if you can get your hand in there with the console running anyway, but if you could, and then it started blipping out. Maybe a capacitor is starting to come loose. Maybe one of the connections dried out. I don't think caps is going to fix it. I think you're on the right track. And That's a really good question. I would start with console 5, and then if not, I would go to AliExpress because that's definitely where a lot of these people are finding theirs is just an AliExpress seller. Uh, and if that doesn't work, let me know and I could see if I could try to find a source for them. Or maybe I could ask Ivory from Retro Castle to just put some of those up for sale on his store. But yeah, I think you're on the right track. Try those two places. And if that doesn't work, let me know and I'll see if I could try to get one sourced for you. Next up, Craig M wants to get my thoughts on Panasonic bringing their new TV lineup back to the US. They've been using LG's OLEDs for a while, but Panasonic's new sets have some interesting features that caught their eye. It seems like exciting stuff. What do I think? So, first of all, most of my information, if not all of it, comes from Vincent Tio from HD TV Test. I happened to catch that video within 5 minutes of him posting it, and I probably watched the same one you did. I'll leave a link in the description for anybody curious. And there's a few things that stand out. First, they're using LG panels, which makes sense because you need a multi-billion-dollar facility to churn those things out. So you're really getting Panasonic's electronics and frame around it. And that, from a gamer's point of view, I think that really remains to be seen if it's better, the same, or equal but slightly different. I get the impression from that one video that they're equal but different. There isn't a definitive winner, but it has some advantages from that point of view. Latency and different resolutions and refresh rates and aspect ratios, all of that stuff matter. That all comes down to the chipset, how it works with modern games and processors. All of that just needs to be tested a little deeper first for me to really decide which I want. But there is one thing that really stood out from that video is the speakers on there supposedly are actually very good. And basically all flat panel speakers are terrible compared to most CRTs because there's just not physical space to do it. And that's not like a CRTs is better thing. It's just that when you have a lot of depth and a lot of extra room, you could put a normal sized speaker. But when you have a flat TV that's supposed to be ultra thin, you have to put tiny little speakers that just can't reproduce the same sound and move the same amount of air. And if you find yourself using your TV speakers mostly and only turning on your stereo on special occasions, that might be a selling point for you. I try to do that. I certainly do that here with this OLED TV and the stereo I have, and that's the one I did the surround sound video on. And the reason is because when I'm watching a Netflix documentary, I don't need all of that. But also on the flip side, if I watch 3 documentaries in a row and then switch to an action movie, when I turn on that stereo, it's like, wow, I'm not used to it. It's special when I do. On the flip side, in my living room setup, I have currently a Panasonic Plasma, which looks beautiful, but the speakers were never good and they're probably 90% blown out anyway. So I end up using the speakers, the ones that I put in the TV stand that I showed in that video too. I end up using that for almost everything. And it's great. I mean, it sounds good, but I definitely notice it less because I'm just used to it. So I wanted to add those thoughts and kind of ramble about that for a second, just to put that into perspective for people, because I know I've said this quite a few times before, but if you have your whole setup and you like it the way it is, awesome. But if you like just watching TV and listening to the audio through the TV speakers, maybe this would be the one to wait for. I also want to kind of hold, as long as my 2016 OLED still lasts, I want to hang out or hold out for a couple more months to see what the 2025 LG TVs have, because I've heard some complete rumors, so I don't even want to repeat them because they could just be complete internet BS, but there could be a few features in the new LGs that would set them aside from basically everything else. So I'm kind of waiting for that before I upgrade. But yeah, so my thoughts, I'll leave the link to Vincent's video, but my thoughts are basically the Panasonics have potential to be better, but you got to wait and see till there's a bunch of deep dive tests. However, it looks like the speakers themselves might just be some of the best, if not the best flat panel audio that ever, I think. So I guess that really remains to be seen as well, but I'll leave a link to that video. Next up, Mr. Morrow has a couple of Dreamcast questions. First, from their understanding, the Dreamcast version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is arcade perfect, and they shouldn't have any input latency. Are they correct? So, arcade perfect is a bit of an extreme term, especially if you talk to pro gamers that know every little tiny difference between them. I think a very fair way to put that would be as close as reasonably possible on a home console of the era. So, from anybody who's not a pro gamer's point of view, yes, if you are a pro gamer, you could still use that to practice if you don't have the CPS3 version and everything. But there are some differences to it. But the basic understanding is, yeah, for your average person, I would call it arcade perfect. I forgot what the little differences are, so if there are any experts listening and you don't mind chiming in, please post in the comments. But yeah, for most of us, I would say yes. And input latency, you wouldn't have any added unless you added it. I mean that with love, of course, but if you're using a wired Dreamcast controller to a CRT, either in VGA mode 480p or in 15 kilohertz mode, where I'm pretty sure you can make that one 240p, then no, it would be the same as the arcade. But if you use wireless controllers, you use it on a flat panel, etc., then that's up to you. Next, the CPS3 Dreamcast games, however, are arcade perfect, but do have latency. So this is where I would really need to jump in and do a deep dive on this. Somebody like Nigel Woodle may have already done something like that. Maybe there's already info in the FGC out there, but I would have to do something like take a high-speed camera and an LED connected to a Dreamcast controller and run the same test like 30 times each. So load up the same level versus the same two opponents, have in controller one, and then press punch, 20, 30, 40 times in a row, and then measure each one how many milliseconds it takes from when the LED lights up to when you see punch on the screen. And then I would have to do the same thing on the CPS3 version. So that's going to be, I don't have the resources or time to do that. So that would be a deep dive analysis, but I don't know if they have any added input latency. So that if anybody knows the answer to that, please let me know. I can't imagine it would be a massive difference. Not like arcade Mortal Kombat 1 versus SNES Mortal Kombat 1, but even then, if it's programmed into the game, that's something most people could adapt to because it's not variable and it's not things like motion interpretive. So like motion blur, how your brain interprets that. Technically, it's not lag, but sometimes it could feel laggy. And I don't want to get into that whole rant again, but so I personally wouldn't approach that as they have lag, but I could be wrong on this one, and I would love to know the actual measurements. I wish I would have had time to test it out of curiosity, but I definitely don't have the ability to do that. Next, do I think the upcoming MVC Fighting Collection will be arcade perfect with zero latency? No, definitely not. Just there's no way you could get that with emulation. You can get close. You could have an excellent experience. You could use tricks to lower the input latency. Maybe you could be almost perfect, but flickers out every once in a while. But I just don't think you should ever count on software emulation to have a perfect experience. Now, sometimes the trade-offs are well worth it. Net play, everything accessed on a modern console, so you don't have to worry about older stuff. If it's scaled properly, it'll look good on a flat panel. I'm not saying don't buy emulation collections. I'm just saying set your expectations straight for what it is that you're going to get. Usually if they're even made well at all, because some are not, if they're made well, it's often about convenience and bringing these games to a newer audience that many of which might really like them, but wouldn't want to go down the rabbit hole of trying to get retro stuff working just to try a couple of games that they may or may not like. And a quick side note, I do think that these are often gateway drugs, for lack of a better term, so I'm a fan of them. I've known lots of people who said they got into retro, either younger people who are just getting into it or old folks like myself who are getting back into it because they bought stuff like the NES Classic, the emulation collections, and sometimes when they're bad, it actually pushes people harder to get original consoles. So yeah, I would really, really just curb your expectations. And I think people are going to continue to use whatever they have been using, with the only exception would be if there's ever an FPGA implementation of the Dreamcast, which is possible, but really hard. Finally, which Dreamcast optical drive emulator do I recommend? Is the official GDEMU still available? So, I stopped following the official GDEMU stuff because it was just impossible. The developer was saying the craziest stuff, like you'd have to have your I think the last one was the FM Towns Marty one. I think you had to have your serial number, and they'd only make a small handful at a time. It was really frustrating, and I definitely do not condone clones, but this is one of those rare scenarios where, first of all, we don't know who cloned it. So everybody that says, oh, how come you get mad at all these other clones, but you don't get mad at this? We don't know who to get mad at. There is no clear indication as to who cloned it. We can't point a finger and say, oh, yeah, Billy Joe Bob bought one, and that's the serial number, and like we just don't know. You can never get them from the original person. Next thing you know, they started popping up everywhere: Amazon, AliExpress, eBay, and it's like sometimes you got to just throw the towel in and say there is no other option. So I don't like clones. They're often very low quality. They often die within a year, and it's not me trying to scare you against clones. I'm just being honest. Ask around about that stuff. So then you just kind of have to look at the other stuff out there, and a lot of it's still do it yourself. So it really just leaves the mode. And if Fixel's ever able to get that project done, that would be the one that I was most interested in trying. But that project's on hold indefinitely. And I don't know. When I say indefinitely, Fixel, that was the announcement made a couple weeks ago of he's got to step back and try to get stock ready, and they'll be back for sale when there's stock ready to ship. No more pre-orders. But that could mean anything. I mean, now that he's refunded people's money, then there's no obligation. So if he wants to take his time, that could be years or days. I just don't know. So I guess I would have to recommend the mode. Also, it's expensive, but very easy to use. The mode, you just plug it in, you load your games on it. When I did that stream with Destiny a couple years ago back in the city, I wanted to add a game to both, or add a version of a game. And it was literally just dropping it onto the drive that the mode had, and then for the other one, for the GDMU, I forgot. I had to fire up the GUI. I had to load it. It was a pain. So I guess for today, right now, I would probably say the mode. But I am still interested in Fixels, and I am still really hoping that that's exactly what he hyped it as. Because if it is, that would be the current best. But only time will tell. So not sure if you wanted such long, boring, and detailed answers to this, but there you go. That's all my thoughts, and hopefully I was able to add some perspective to all that. Next up, Lily Larceny has a Samsung QLED Q90 from 2020, and they just can't get their RetroTink 4K CRT filters to look right. They bought the TV new, and it's by no means worn out or in need of replacing, and it works well for modern games and movies. It's got deep blacks, 10 milliseconds response time, 120 Hz, VRR, etc. They probably should have bought the LG OLED for the same money or less, but this is what they have. And they've had problems with it in the past for other things like GC video, but this is running in native resolution. Maybe they're being too critical. The CRT filters look good while not moving, but they have a lot of ghosting and motion blur. The TV has BFI to take it from 4K 60 to 120, but they don't see any reduction in ghosting, and when they use HDR injection, they get a gross shimmer that ruins the picture. When they drop the resolution to 1080 or 1440 at 120 and use the Tinks BFI, they get a constant slow black strobing that's unbearable and makes the games unplayable. They have that crisp 36-inch Trinitron sitting next to it, with the video split from their 10x3 SCART switch, and seeing the image side by side is a stark contrast. It makes the Samsung look like trash. Is there any hope for settings, profiles, or guides that can improve the look on this TV, or should they just stick to playing 240p content on their CRT until they're ready for a new OLED? So, great question, and I have never had excellent luck with scanline emulation on LCDs. I've had some good luck. I've had some terrible TVs. That Vizio that I bought last year and returned like the same day or the day after, that just looked bad no matter what I did. So, but I mean, your very nice Samsung is not at all in the same ballpark as some bottom of the barrel thing that I bought, So I'm just making the comparison to say that LCD technology is definitely different, and the way the backlights work, the way the pixel grids are lined up could make a big difference. And also, I've seen some that it's instead of red, green, blue, it's blue, green, red, and that sometimes makes text a little bit blurrier, and that will absolutely affect video games and scan lines and stuff like that. I've seen some panels that were upside down. I still to this day do not understand why, but instead of writing from top to bottom, they're very clearly flipped inside the chassis and they write from bottom to top. That's caused some weird issues because then you do have the individual pixels reversed. And when I say cause issues, mostly for PC and filtering stuff, not so much for just watching TV. So it could have been any of those little things. The other stuff that I guess I would just suggest is maybe try the tried every type of scan line. When I say every type, I don't mean go and try every single preset filter. I mean, try the mono ones and the color ones. Try really high density BVM emulation. Try consumer CRT emulation, and do any of them look better? And if not, it could just not look good on that TV, which I know sucks. You spent a lot of money on a gorgeous TV and you can't use one of the main things you might want to use on it. But that's just the way it is when you're trying to emulate old technology on newer TVs. So, you know, the scan lines on my 2016 LG OLED often look perfect, and sometimes there's weird issues. It changes the overall color of the image, and I'm wondering if it's the age of the OLED, or meaning like the technology isn't quite up to snuff for something that's new, or if it's just that some video content is always going to look weird when you apply scan lines. And it's just one of these things that it's going to be a constant battle. And that could be one of the many reasons why bigger companies don't try to implement filters like this, because there's just too many use cases. Video games versus movies, 240p versus 480i versus 480p video games. There's so many factors into how these filters work. So, I guess my short answer is you might be screwed, but just try high TVL and low TVL, as well as both RGB and mono masks. So basically try 4 more just to double check. And if any one of them looks good, cool. But if not, I don't know. And also BFI isn't definitely not the same on an LED TV, even a QLED, than it would be as an OLED TV. So I've also had mixed results with that as well. And I don't really feel the flicker of BFI on an OLED, but I definitely did on the LCD TVs that I tried it on. So, and it wasn't bad. It didn't give me a headache or anything, but it felt different. So those are all my thoughts. I might be completely useless to you in this one, but sorry that the TV isn't working out the way you hoped. It is a really nice TV, but look at the bright side. You don't have to worry about burn-in, and you could use it in a much brighter room, right? Next up, Tom M wants to know if I knew of a source to get high-quality custom cables besides retro access. They ordered a 75 ohm SCART to SCART cable back in March, and it still is not shipped. They're fairly patient, and they feel bad if they have stuff happening in life, but they're starting to lose confidence that they'll catch back up. Yeah, Rachel's been in a rough spot. Anybody that's followed on social media has seen that unfold, and I tried to stay in touch as much as I could, but I'm not sure what the status of that company is or what it would be in the future. I know for a while there, she was asking people to, if you wanted your cables sooner, to pay a little extra to bump yourself to the top of the line, which I know that upset quite a lot of people. I'm being very careful because for whatever reason, there were people who got upset about that whole situation, about the retro access situation that had nothing to do with it, and they were looking for somebody to be mad at. And as usual, I got hit a couple of times for no reason. I've known Rachel over a decade, and I've been talking to her this whole time, so I'm doing my best to help, but I don't know what the story is with that, and anything I could say about their future would be a complete guess, and it could change tomorrow anyway. So I don't know what to tell you about getting your SCART cable or not. I would reach out and email and just see if you can get a response. But if you want custom cables, that's going to be rough. You might have to resort to trying to make it your own, or trying to find other modders that could do it for you. But if you're just looking for a shielded SCART to SCART cable, Retro Gaming Cable sells those, and they're very good. And depending on your use case, the cheap ones on Amazon, the Cable Direct with a K, those are great backup cables. They're not fully shielded, so they do have individual ground lines for each signal line, but it's not ground shielding around the signal to run alongside it. So you still get some video interference, you still get some audio hum, but they're very cheap. So I've been suggesting to people who need one of these, when all of the companies are out of stock, to pick up one of those, and just to hold you off, and just know that it's not gonna be the perfect answer. But I think they were less than $20 last time I checked. And now, once you do eventually get a shielded cable, then you could kind of go and take a look and go, all right, well, I'll put the shielded cable in. Now I have this backup cable if I ever need it for testing. And, that's definitely the typical tool in your toolbox type of thing to have. An extra SCART cable that isn't great, but it wasn't expensive, and you could probably use it again. So I'll leave a link to those if I could find them, and I'm still going to try my best to be patient with Rachel and the whole retro access solution, especially because she's been part of the community for a long time. So I don't think a witch hunt is the way to solve this. I think I'm going to try my best just to have patience, but I completely understand if any customer is like, hey, enough's enough. It's been a long time. You have my money. I need my money back, or I need a cable, or I need something. I mean, we're all human, right? Everybody has a finite amount of money here. We can't just throw stuff away. So I would just, I guess I would just suggest, I know I'm stepping out of my lane here. If you need to do stuff like that, just try to do it in the politest way possible. Don't light a torch and get on social media and start riling people up. Just handle it however you need to handle it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too soft. Or maybe I'm being too rough. I don't know. When somebody's been in the community that long and is not known for ripping people off, then I try to have a lot more patience. Whereas if this was somebody who took pre-orders and ran away with people's money and then came back in the scene and then did something else crappy, like I'd be totally different. But I don't know. I'm probably still going to catch crap for even talking about it at all. So I'm just going to move along. No offense to you whatsoever, Tom. I just want to tread carefully. Next up, Tim the Gamer 23 was wondering if I could recommend a good power supply replacement for the Sega CDX. So when I still had a CDX, I was using a typical triad solution. I actually had a 32X connected to it, so I used a slightly higher amperage triad with one of those DC power splitters, but that's all I used. And I'm going by memory here. I'm pretty sure Steve from HD Retrovision did an analysis of basically all the consoles that you could connect these different power supplies to, which was then looked over by Firebrand X and quite a bunch of other people in the scene. And I thought when there were slight differences like 9.5 to 9 volts, that as long as it was a quality power supply, then it wouldn't really make a difference at all. 5 volts to 9 volts would be a massive difference, and you should not do that, of course, but I don't think there was ever an issue with that. I also know that original CDX power supplies are very, very expensive, and I don't know if it's just to keep a complete package or if people really think that there is a difference. I did have the original as well. I popped it open and replaced the capacitor in it. I tested it, and then I only used the triad after that because it was just easier. It was smaller, lighter, and it was higher amperage. I think I got the 3.5 amp version, so I was able to power everything without worrying at all. I'm pretty sure that 3.5 was way overkill for that, but with amperage, you don't have to worry. It could be a million amp power supply, and your console's only going to draw what it needs. It's not like you're over amping anything. So, FBX, if you're listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure just a good quality Genesis 2 power supply would be all that you need. So, obviously double check because this is an expensive and rare console, but I definitely used the triads in mine before I sold it, and the person I sold it to was out of the US, and they used the same exact international triad with the DC power splitter to power that whole setup. So I'm pretty sure that's the right answer, but it's just been a couple of years, probably 5 years since I've did the deep dive into that, and I'm just not remembering. So sorry, Tim. FBX, if you got time to jump in, that would be awesome. Next, Acnot54 was wondering if I knew of any developers that have continued creating virtual taps based on Vertex design. So I thought Castlemania was selling them a while back, and I thought there was at least a couple other stores around the world, but I haven't really dug into that in a couple of years now, so I don't know if they sold out of all of their stock and they just haven't gotten them back in. I do remember that the stores that were selling them were 100% compliant with the open source rules. They were crediting Furtech and not sending people to Furtech for support. They were taking care of everything. They were doing it right. They were doing exactly what you would hope somebody would do with an open source project. I just don't know if any of them are still in stock. So I would just search and I would buy it from any store other than Bitfunks. Maybe they haven't gotten to that yet, but that's basically it. There should be other stores selling it. You could try Planet Virtual Boy, the website, and their Discord server. That's probably a great resource, and I'll see if I could leave a link to that for you. Well, that's it for this week. If you're a supporter who wants to participate in these, ask any question you would like, just please do it in the latest Q&A post wherever it is that you support. The way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw here today, I like just scrolling through in real time and answering the questions as if we were hanging out at a bar or coffee shop somewhere. So, as always, thanks to everybody who participates, and especially thanks to everybody who supports in any way possible. See you next week.